So the big news today obviously is the government's targeting of Article 370 of the Constitution and other moves obviously including the bifurcation of Jammu and Kashmir. But let's stick to Article 370 here. So what exactly has the government done today? What does that mean for things like Article 35A? And is there any scope to actually challenge this and stop it from happening? So let's begin with it. Article 370 of the Constitution, as we all know, is what's meant to give special status to Jammu and Kashmir. It means that all provisions of the Constitution don't automatically apply to the state. They only apply after the President consults with the government of Jammu and Kashmir and then issues an order to notify the same. Now, what we've seen today is a presidential notification under Article 370 subclause 1 of the Constitution of India, which does a few things. Now, what we heard in Parliament was that the government is sort of scrapping Article 370, that's what the news channels are saying. That's not exactly what they've done, because under this order, it does the following things. First, it supersedes and takes effect over any other constitutional orders, including the one from 1954, which is important because that's the one which brought in Article 35A. The second thing which it does is that it says that all provisions of the Constitution of India apply to Jammu and Kashmir, subject to certain modifications. But the subject to modifications are not actually applicable to any of the actual provisions of the Constitution. They're only making changes to interpretation of certain things. So effectively, what this notification does is that it applies all of the Constitution to the state of Jammu and Kashmir, unlike earlier, which only had certain parts of it applied, and two, it supersedes any old orders. So what that means is that Article 35A, which for instance granted property rights to Kashmiri permanent residents which otherwise didn't exist for anyone else, those will no longer be applicable. And that's obviously a huge thing for the state of Jammu and Kashmir, because at the time of accession, in subsequent negotiations, it was always one of the most important points which they raised, that we don't want to have outsiders coming in to be able to own property. So that's the first big thing which it does. The second big thing obviously is that it's now effectively ended the concept of Article 370, because it has now applied all of the Constitution. It's not removed Article 370, it's just effectively ended any point which that provision had. The third thing obviously, and which is a very important thing going forward, is that while they've not as of now removed it, they've laid the groundwork for being able to remove Article 370. Because the only way Article 370 could be removed was in accordance with what was there in subclause 3. Now, subclause 3 said that the President can by order remove it, but this requires approval of the Constituent Assembly of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. But the Constituent Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir was dissolved back in the 1950s, so it doesn't exist. So it was not, it was considered that this was impossible to do. But what they've done now is, they've said that the words Constituent Assembly of the state should now be interpreted as Legislative Assembly of the state. So which means that whenever another state government in Jammu and Kashmir gets elected, any legislature gets elected in Jammu and Kashmir, they can now remove Article 370 rather than being in the situation where only the Constituent Assembly could do it. So that's what's happened at this point. So what does this mean? Can this be challenged? Well, I mean, the parties and the people of Jammu and Kashmir are obviously up in arms already, and they've continuously raised issues of this, because the whole point of Article 370 was that it was what gave effect to the terms of the instrument of accession signed by the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir to bring Jammu and Kashmir into India. So the challenges which will come up are, first off, you would imagine that this entire notification should be challenged as being not in accordance with Article 370 subclause 1 of the Constitution, because only the governor gave assent to it, not the elected government of Kashmir. So that's one ground for challenge. Second ground for challenge would be that this kind of order cannot be used to supersede an existing order, such as the 1954 one and Article 35A, because again, Article 35A was pretty much one of the specific things included in the Delhi Agreement in 1952, which was specified to be essential to Kashmir being part of India. And then the other ground for challenge would obviously be that these modifications to the language being made here are incorrect and are inapplicable. Now, would this be a basic structure challenge under the Constitution? That's not exactly clear, because Article 370 seems to obviously be crucial to the Constitution, but it may not be considered part of the basic structure, since it also allows for the President to modify its application under Article 370 subclause 1 and subclause 3. But the key thing here is that everything was pushed through only with consultation and assent of the governor, and that is going to be one of the key grounds for challenge, to say that the governor cannot make this decision. It required elected representatives. That didn't take place, and therefore this order was not in accordance with Article 370. So that's what we're going to have to wait and see what gets taken up in the court, because you'd expect them to move the Supreme Court, because they have to do it, because at this moment in time, everything in this order and set by the government is in force.